Well, everybody, thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome to Nancy's presentation. My name is Aaron Chung, and I'm a teacher consultant with TDSB's Autism Services, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. Before we start, I'll just go over a couple of housekeeping issues. First, if you don't mind, mute your mics and you can turn your cameras off. And also, use the chat box to comment or to ask questions. And in order for us to stay within our planned hour, we're going to ask that you post your questions in the chat, and then we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. So those are done, and I just want to introduce you to our guest speaker, Dr. Nancy Freeman. Dr. Freeman kindly agreed to present at our conference and highlight some key information about the Ontario Autism Program. She'll have some time for short question and answers afterwards, and that's when we can get to see how this applies to yourselves. So Dr. Freeman has dedicated her career to working with children and youth on the autism spectrum. Her professional practice includes diagnosis, evidence-based intervention, and clinical supervision. And for the last 18 years, she's been clinical director for autism services at Surrey Place. She is an adjunct professor in graduate psychology at York University and is a member of the Professional Practice Committee for the Ontario Association for Behavior Analysis. You may know that as ONTABA. And Nancy has participated on and chaired provincial expert panels on behavioral treatment for children with autism, and published and presented widely at conferences in areas that affect children on the autism spectrum and their families, including intensive behavior intervention, communication, best practice in assessment and diagnosis, and parenting stress and coping. So, Dr. Freeman, thank you again for spending your afternoon with us, and I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thanks, Aaron. So as Aaron said, we do have lots of time for questions. Last year, there were lots of questions at the conference when I gave an earlier version of this talk. So I've shortened my talk quite a bit because I know some folks were kind of torn. They wanted to continue asking questions, but they had signed up for other sessions. So I've got about 30 slides, and we should be able to get through that in very good time, and happy to take any questions at the end of that. And Aaron, thank you for moderating the chat for me so I can focus on the slides. So this really is an update from last year's talk to let people know what's changed, what's still going on in the autism program and what's changed since then. And as Aaron said, I'm at Surrey Place Centre in Toronto. So just a quick outline of what I'm going to be discussing over the next hour. I want to give a bit of a recap from what I talked about last year, just for folks who were not able to attend that session. I want to tell you a bit about registering for the Ontario Autism Program. I want to talk about funding that's currently available to families. So there's something that's called Interim One-Time Funding, or IOTF. There's a lot of acronyms. And I'll be trying not to use the acronyms. I'll try to always use the names. And then what's in development and on its way is the new needs-based Ontario Autism Program. The government calls that the OAP. And within the OAP, I'm going to be talking a little bit about something that's called the Independent Intake Organization. I'm going to talk about services that are either currently available in the autism programming across Ontario. So it isn't just Toronto, it's across the province, or that are in development. And these services are foundational family services, something called Caregiver Mediated Early Years. There's an entry to school program, an urgent response program, and core clinical services. So that's what I plan to touch on over the next half hour or so. So just as a quick recap, going back a couple years ago, there was a series of government announcements. And what the government basically said, the gist of it was that funding to agencies to provide the Ontario Autism Program would stop, and instead the funds or the money would be given directly to families, and the families could use that money to purchase the services they wanted for their child. But they wanted to reassure families who were currently in service that if their child did have a behavior plan in place, that could continue, the child could continue to receive that service, there wouldn't be gaps, and that child could stay in service until they transition into the new needs-based program when that's up and running. And that has continued to happen. So those families are getting service. If kids were continuing the program, they could continue to get the current amount of treatment they were getting, or if the family and clinician felt that less intensity was appropriate, they could receive less intense service. And that the government said that they would want all the practices, the good practices that were happening, to continue. So there'd be continuing 6-month reviews, the child's treatment, and setting new appropriate goals that the family wanted the child to work on, so that the program could continue to help the child. So that's kind of a quick recap of what was happening. So I'm going to talk about now registering for the Ontario Autism Program. So in order to register, and this is province-wide, so a child must live in Ontario, they must be under the age of 18, they need to have a written diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder by a qualified professional. So that would typically be a psychologist, a physician, a developmental pediatrician. Those kinds of folks can make a diagnosis. If your child was already registered in the autism program and was waiting for service or is receiving service, you don't need to register again. All those names were provided to the ministry. We received a request from the ministry to transfer our wait lists over, and families would have received a letter from the government saying they were now responsible for the waiting list. This was a couple years ago. We transferred all those names, so you don't have to re-register. You are already registered, or your child is. But if you're not registered, you can at any time register if your child has a diagnosis as under 18. There's an online registration form, and I've put the website there. And Aaron has these slides, so they're available to people. And Aaron, I believe, are we being recorded? Yeah, so this is also being recorded. So if you want to come back, but also if you just even Googled, just threw into your Google Ontario Autism Program registration, it would come up right away easily. And if you have questions for the government, if you want to know more about the program after this talk, or you want to hear details from another source, you can send questions to the Central Resource Team. So that is the Ontario government, and the email address is there, oap@ontario.ca, or they have a 1-888 number, so 1-888-444-4530. And again, you can speak to someone in the government about the Ontario Autism Program. So I want to tell you a little bit about the funding that's currently available for children who were on the waiting list. So there's this thing, this is where the acronyms start. So it's called Interim One-Time Funding, or IOTF. This was funding that was announced back a couple years ago. And the amount of funding per year is $5,000 for children who are age 6 or older up to 18. And for kids under 6, it's $20,000. So to receive this money, you have to have applied to the Ontario Autism Program by March 31st of this year, 2021. And you would receive an invitation letter from the government inviting you to apply for interim one-time funding. Then you complete an application form and you'd be able to receive the funding. Children who would not be able to, or would not be eligible for this one-time funding, are kids who are already receiving behavioral services in the Ontario Autism Program. So, if you were getting service, for instance, from us at Surrey Place, you could not also get the money because the purpose of the money is to purchase services. If you wanted to switch and not get the behavioral service anymore, and you wanted to get instead this one-time funding, you could certainly request that. You could just say, I want to end my behavioral service. And we would let the ministry know that you want to end service with your permission and consent, of course. And we would request that you get one of these invitation letters sent to you, and then it would be back up to the top of the slide where you can apply for the money once you've got the invitation. So I want to tell you a bit about when you can use this money, just in case for some parents they have it, and we've heard some parents aren't quite sure when they can start spending the money. So your funding, the date your funding is effective is either if you got a check, it's the date on your check, or if you had electronic transfer, it's the date the money goes into your bank account. So as soon as either of those things happen, you can start to purchase service. But it's important to note that it's not retroactive. So if you were buying services before the date on the check, or if you were buying services before your electronic transfer went into your account, you cannot apply the funding to those services. Once you've purchased services, you need to submit an expense form to the ministry, and they would reconcile your funding. So it'd say, you'd spent this much money, this is what you have left. And just like anything, any government funds or taxes, you need to keep all your receipts, your invoices, and your proof of payment for 7 years. That's just like, when you file your income tax. In case you're audited, you need to keep those things. Initially, when the government started this funding, it was you had a year to spend the money, but because of COVID, they've extended it so parents can have up to 18 months to spend the funding, because they know for some families, either they were having difficulties finding service, or they didn't feel comfortable purchasing service, having their child be in another setting. So the government extended the timeline, so you have 18 months to spend it. And then when it's spent, you might be eligible to receive an additional payment based on your child's age as of April 1st of this year. And that would be an additional payment of either $5,000 or $20,000, depending on your child's age. So what can you buy with this interim one-time funding? You can continue to purchase behavioral services, which is what the program was originally set out to fund. But there's other kinds of things that you can also use the interim one-time funding for. So you can buy other autism services and support. So if you wanted parent training, for example, you could use the funding for that. Other therapies are covered by this money. So speech language therapy, occupational therapy, and physiotherapy can all be purchased with this funding. You could use the funding for respite services. So if you wanted to have a break and know that your child was safe in a safe environment with trained professionals, you might purchase respite services so that you could, have a night out or a weekend away and not have to worry about your child's safety. You could use the funds to assist you with planning services and the supports that your families might need. Travel is also covered. It's not the exciting kind of travel that many of us think about. It's and wish for during COVID. It's for kilometers. As an example, if you needed to drive your child to a center, there's a set kilometer rate that you could claim in an expense form that you would fill out. You can use the funding to purchase technology. So if your child, for instance, has a challenge with communication, you might want to buy an iPad and the associated software to help with your child's communication. And if that's recommended by the professionals involved in your child's treatment, either a board certified behavior analyst or speech pathologist, for example, you could buy the technology that could be used to help your child's learning. And then any other equipment and materials that are specifically related to the services that your child's receiving through this funding. So if they needed program materials or books or something like that, that could also be covered. So there's quite a wide range of things that can be covered by this interim one-time funding. I want to talk a little bit about the documentation, because sometimes people aren't aware of what's needed and you want to make sure that you don't have any problems with your reimbursements. So if you were buying behavioral services, there's a special process, because behavior analysts are not currently regulated in the province of Ontario, although I'm happy to say that is in process and they will become regulated. Yeah, I see your smile, Aaron. There will be regulation coming, which is something that we've been working on for 20 years now. So we're thrilled to see that it will be happening. But in the meantime, the Ontario Autism Program has set up what's called a provider list. So this is run through Autism Ontario, and people can either apply to be on the provider list. So I'm on the provider list, or if you don't meet the criteria yet to be on the priority list, you're in process, perhaps you're not quite there, you sign a special form. It's called an attestation form, where it's like a 4-page form where you're basically saying, yes, I have insurance. Yes, I have this kind of training. And you're basically you're agreeing to a bunch of things and stating it. And you actually give a copy of that to the parents, so they know that even though you're not on the list yet, that you've agreed to all these things that protect their child, that you're agreeing to the standards of practice, that you have professional insurance, that you understand how to do the therapy appropriately. So that's if it's a behavioral service. And then any of the invoices, this is just a little bit fussy detail, but just so you know, the invoices from your providers need specific information. The government has said they have to have an invoice number. They need to say who's providing your service. It has to have the license for your professional. So if I was providing your service, it would have my College of Psychologists license number on it. It needs to list all the services that are provided and how much they cost, or if you're buying technology, what items were purchased and what did they cost, and then the dates. So it's a fairly simple invoice, but it's important that they have all those pieces, and any provider that you were working with in the Ontario Autism Program should know this. And all this information is publicly available on the ministry website. If people have, if you're with a provider and they weren't sure, they can easily access that information. So that's sort of the last slide on the past. I'm just going to take a quick pause and start talking more about the present and the future of Ontario autism services in Ontario. So the government is developing a needs-based program. So I don't know if you can see my cursor down here, but last year I talked quite a bit about the advisory panel report, and I just put up a little screenshot so you could see, just as a little reminder, if you're at that talk, and that document is still publicly available if people want to take a look at it. But the gist of it was the panel recommended the development of a needs-based program. So the government had said there would be these chunks of funding, and it was really, the 5,000 or 20,000. And the advisory panel said, yeah, kids need more than that. Many kids need, not all kids, but some kids will need more than that. And it really should be a program that's based on the needs of the child rather than a set amount of money. So the government heeded that advice. They struck what they called an implementation working group to make recommendations out of the advisory panel report. And this new implementation working group continues to work and is working right through COVID. And it's made up of people who provide autism services, self-advocates, so adults diagnosed on the autism spectrum, parents of children and youth with autism. There's representation from Northern Ontario, which is really critical because there are so many challenges for our rural and remote communities. There's Indigenous community representation, and then there's representation from that former advisory panel to have that linkage with the past recommendations. So in terms of the needs-based Ontario Autism Program, there are some things that are already available now and some things that are still being developed. So the things that are in bold are currently available, and the things that are not in bold are in development. So the independent, and I'll talk about each of these things in more detail, but there's going to be an independent intake organization in development. Foundational family services are currently available. Caregiver mediated early years are currently available. Entry to school, urgent response, care coordinators, and core services, I would say, are more in the development phase right now. So the independent intake organization. So I told you a few minutes ago that if your child is not yet registered, or if you're on a waiting list, they're on a waiting list with the government with this central resource team. That is a temporary state. What the government wants to do is have an independent intake organization. So that means that they are not government and they are not an autism service provider. So they're intended to be completely independent. So they put out a call for applications for agencies that wanted to be the intake organization. and that closed. So that's what that IIO, Independent Intake Organization, the application process closed at the end of February for this year. And the identification of what agency will take on that work is currently underway. So the responsibilities of that future agency, when it's up and running, will be to take on, many of the functions that the provincial central resource team is doing now. So they're going to manage intake, they'll manage registration and the wait list. It was their responsibility to provide funding to families and to reconcile that funding from the families. Their role will include coordinating service access for families. They're going to have folks called care coordinators. So it'll be this agency's job to hire those folks and train them up. And the care coordinators will help the families to navigate services, to, any assistance they need in terms of funding as kids are transitioning between services or out of service, and also to identify the level of support a child needs. So that's quite a significant responsibility that this organization will be taking on. It's going to be also their responsibility to promote quality improvements in the programs and capacity building. And capacity has been an issue in the province, having enough providers to deliver the services that children need and families deserve. And then finally, they will be responsible for coordinating a dispute resolution process. So if families are not in agreement with decisions, they will need to be coordinating that piece as well. So quite a big, as I say, responsibility. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about some of the services that are available. So one of the services in the Ontario Autism program that is available now to all families, if you're registered in the autism program in Ontario, and from whatever point of registration up until your child turns 18. And there are tons of these services, and if you want to look at them and browse them more fully, I've put up a couple of websites there for you. One is the Surrey Place website. So that's where I work at surreyplace.ca, and then there's a /autism, and that will show you all sorts of foundational family services that you can receive. Or we also have a website called torontoautismservices.ca, and that will include both not only the services that we offer, but we're part of a partnership across Toronto with several other agencies. We've been working with these agencies for 20 years now, and they're offering many of these services as well. So depending on what part of town you live in or what agencies you've been involved with before, you might want to select one of those other agencies. But these free services include things like family and peer mentoring, workshops for parents and caregivers, and those workshops often are followed up with direct coaching for your child or youth. We have some brief consultation that's quite specific, quite targeted, so it's not intended to be the therapy. This is a brief service. We have supports for kids transitioning, and then we've got lots of family resources, and we run clinic days. So it's quite a wide range of things, and these are available for free right now, and the website information is there. Another service that is available right now may not be as relevant for you if you have a child in school with autism, because it's for younger kids, but you may have a younger sibling on the autism spectrum that would be able to access this service. So I did want to mention it just in case there's younger siblings, because we know that happens in some families. There's more than one child on the spectrum. So in order to receive these caregiver mediated early years services, a family would receive an invitation letter from the ministry. So all the kids who are on the wait list would starting to receive letters over time. And it's for kids up to their 4th birthday. The specific services again are on that our Surrey Place website, as well as the torontoautismservices.ca website. If people are wanting to see the specific services, but really the purpose of these caregiver mediated interventions is to help parents learn how to help their child develop skills. So that's what the mediated means. We're not working only with your child, we're in fact working with you to help you to develop more skills, to help your child develop their social interaction skills, play skills, communication skills, they're developing emotions, and self-help skills. So the two services that Surrey Place is offering right now, one is called Project Impact, and we've been doing Project Impact for over 15 years. It's out of University of Michigan with Brooke Ingersoll, and the other intervention that we're offering is called Pivotal Response Treatment. So those are both available for younger kids. I'm now going to start talking about things that are in development. So they're not yet available, but they will be coming available. So one of the services in the Ontario Autism Program is called Entry to School. So Surrey Place was part of a team in Toronto with several other agencies that applied. And the application to provide the service closed in in the end of June of this year. So the ministry is currently identifying which agencies will be funded to provide this service. So we're quite excited about this potential opportunity. Again, it's for younger kids. So if you have children who are not yet attending school, this is a service that you might want to consider. It's a 6-month intervention to build skills for kids between 3 to 5 years of age. It's a half-day program, 5 days a week. And it's for kids who would be entering school for the first time. So if you've got little ones who are not yet in school. And then after the program ends, there's a transitional support service as kids enter school with consultation for the schools and for the parents for the first 6 months while kids are in school. So it's really quite an exciting collaboration to be working together with our partners at Toronto District School Board and Toronto Catholic Board as we move along with this and hoping to hear about this application process soon. So that's Entry to School is not happening yet. Also in development is something called urgent response. So this is different than a crisis response. So when you think of crisis, you're dealing with something immediately, you might be calling 911 or other first responders. So this is not intended to be a crisis response, but it's a step down from that. So it's a time-limited service, and it's really intended to help when there's a really specific need that needs to be addressed and can't wait, and to prevent it from becoming a crisis. So to prevent the escalation, particularly things around, children or youth harming themselves or harming other people or destroying property. Those are the kinds of things this intervention would assist with. And really the purpose is to try to stabilize the child or youth and prevent that crisis before it happens. So usually they'll be in this intervention service, it would be typically one area would be targeted, and it is considered to be time limited. And this urgent response would not be standalone. It would be integrated with the core services they'll talk about in a minute, the foundational family services that I've already spoken about, and all the other OAP services like care coordinators and other services a child might be involved with. So I'm just going to take a drink because I hear my voice starting to go. So I'm going to just very briefly talk about core services, then tell you about some of the core services at Surrey Place. And so we won't be too much longer and still have lots of time for questions, Erin. So the core services that can be purchased in the new OAP, so it has not yet, they've just got a pilot and a few hundred kids in the pilot, but as kids come online in the program, and these initial kids have started and there'll be more kids coming, you can use that funding to buy 4 kinds of services. So applied behavior analysis, or ABA, which has been the bread and butter of the Ontario Autism Program for over 20 years, but also the addition of speech language pathology and occupational therapy, and very importantly, mental health services, because we know that some children and youth on the autism spectrum experience mental health challenges. So counseling and psychotherapy could also be purchased. And then similar to the funding that's available right now, technology could be purchased if it's recommended by regulated health professionals. So that would be speech pathologist, occupational therapist, psychologist, or if it's recommended by your behavior analyst. So I gave the example earlier of an iPad, if it's useful for your child's communication or needed for learning. So I'm just going to very quickly talk about the services that are available at Surrey Place, that the core services that we have, to give people a sense of what's available in Toronto. So if you were wanting your child to receive services from us, we have a 1833 number. And one of the nice things about this telephone number is we have a translation in any language available. So if you call that number and English is not your first language and you prefer to speak in your home language, we certainly can do that at your intake. Or for some folks, they prefer to register online, surreyplace.ca, and you can do your registration there. In terms of where we're located, we have 4 main sites in the city. We're also in a few schools through some of our other programs, but our main sites are downtown is our main office at 2 Surrey Place. So we're right across the road from Queen's Park. In Scarborough, we're on Milner Business Court. In North York, we're on Champlain, which is roughly the Allen and Finch. And in the west, we're on Islington, right by the 401. And so the intention of our locations is that they're easily accessible either by car or by transit. So the services that we have, the core services that we have available or are coming online for purchase at Surrey Place are ABA, not surprisingly. So focusing on communication, social skills, helping kids regulate their behavior or self-help skills, daily living skills. And we are going to be bringing online, we're in very soon, we'll be posting our website, speech language, both assessment and intervention, occupational therapy, assessment and intervention, and a menu of mental health services. So let me just tell you some of the behavioral services that we have at this time. So we've got social skills groups, and we tend to break them up into groups for younger kids and older kids, usually about 2-year age cohorts. So we've got social skills groups that run for 20 weeks, 2 hours twice per week, and they're really about helping kids or teens develop social skills, conversation skills. And as kids get older, so our teens, the issues become a bit more complicated that we're dealing with. So, the qualities of, what is a good friend? What's a friend that, something that a friend you'd rather avoid? How do you deal with rejection and gossiping and teasing and bullying? We have friendship groups that are of similar length, 20 weeks, but once per week, and they're really focusing on conflict and helping kids make and keep friends. I'm going to pick it up a little bit, Erin, because I'm just seeing the time. We have teen groups, several different kinds of teen groups that happen once per week for 20-week blocks. So conversation groups, helping kids understand nonverbal communication, turn taking, and some of those subtler features of conversation. Our working together is a group of peers working on a project of interest. And really the purpose of the group is not to teach the specific thing that they're working on, but to help them understand how to interact effectively with peers. And then we've also run robotics programs where we teach kids coding and programming so they can build a mechanical robot. Again, really the purpose of that is not to teach coding, it's to teach kids how to cooperate on a project. Our groups for emotional regulation, we again break them into age groups and helping kids recognize emotional difficulties and how to cope with frustration. We have daily living or self-help groups. They run 20 weeks, twice per week. And we break them up by boys and by girls because we're exploring issues around gender, self-awareness, hygiene, consent, and how to keep themselves safe as they become teenagers. So we do those separately for girls and boys. And then we have some services that are some children or families, the services we offer aren't fitting what they're wanting to target. So we do have individualized custom packages where you can purchase up to 15 hours per week. And we would set the goals together with the child, youth, and family on what they wanted to work on. We also, just so folks know, have psychological assessments available for purchase, but I want to make sure families are aware this is not covered by the Ministry Ontario Autism Program. So families might have insurance coverage to purchase these services, but they're not, but it's not covered by the government funding. But we heard from many families that they were wanting to purchase assessments, so we've we're doing that as well. So it might be an assessment for a diagnosis of autism, or a psychoeducational assessment, or something that's more diagnostic. And then the services that are in development and coming soon, we are in the final stages of finalizing an after school group. So this would happen either 4 days a week or 5 days a week, depending on what families wanted, for a couple hours after school. And it's an ABA group. We'll be bringing online our speech language services, our occupational therapy services, and then our mental health. The first two offers that we're going to have up and available are counseling for teenagers, so individual counseling for teens, and then a coping with COVID teen group. So we know that COVID has been very, very difficult for everyone. And we want to have the opportunity for teenagers that might want to have a discussion and learn how to cope better with all the things that came up for them, and will continue to come up for them, as unfortunately we still live in a world with COVID, and will probably, unfortunately, for some time. So I think, Erin, I got through a little bit longer than I'd planned, but I think we still do have probably about 20 minutes or so. If there are questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Beautiful. That was a nice pace, Nancy.
Thanks.
A lot of information.
It's a lot. It's hard to, I know it's a lot, but that's why I say the slides are there and the recording is there if people need to look at it again.
Yeah. Right. So if anybody has questions about the information that Nancy presented, by all means, throw it up on the chat. Or if you're comfortable, you can turn on your mic and just
Sure.
pull it out, and we can all have some discussions. You may also have already started some of these experiences and may want to share. This conference is about bringing other parents together so that we can learn from each other.
Hi, Nancy. My name is Kavri. I have a 4-year-old who just started school. He was diagnosed around 2.5 years. So it was in between the pandemic when we started to do the services. So I am currently signed up with Sorry Place, waiting for ABA. So I know with the pandemic, when we tried to call to a lot of the services that are on the provider list, a lot of them saying that because they've been backed up so much that parents like us who either had a recent diagnosis or are just getting to know are kind of on a really long wait list. However, I think I kind of wanted to let the parents know here that Sorry Place also has a lot of free workshops. That was really helpful for me as a parent who was completely lost. At least just to get something started at home with your child, whether it was behavioral issues or feeding, such as how to get them to sit down for a few minutes to do independent tasks or anything that we really wanted to. I found those workshops really, really helpful. I think I've even did the triple P program that was on awarded through, that was given through. So my question is for those on the waiting list as such as I, and with TDSB and throughout the school boards, there's a lot of cutbacks on EAs as well too. Looking for that extra support or looking to kind of waiting this COVID out. How is this new program where it's more of a needs-based program? Like, how would it be catered towards us? And when we do get to that point, we're kind of, my question is, my anxiety is that we're losing precious time where we could be doing a lot of things because they're developing, as a child. But at the same time, if he does pass that years, would the therapies and still be available to us?
Yeah, so if your child is on the waiting list, then absolutely, the Ontario Autism Program goes up to age 18. So kids can continue through preschool years, school years, and through their teen years. It's available. And thank you for your kind words about the workshops that we've offered and the services we offered. And I really do encourage families to take a look at that it's really hard to feel like you're waiting for things. And it's actually tons parents are able to access, as you've said, while they're waiting for core services. Depending on when your child was diagnosed and registered, you could access that interim funding that I talked about. I don't know if you registered with the program before March 31st of this year.
Yes, I'm currently doing all of my services through that funding and just using the private ones.
Great.
And it's,
Good.
it's a great thing that you just told me about making sure that they either have the attestation form, which I will be making sure that the providers do, which is what I've been doing. I'm also on a Facebook group, and there's a lot of parents there that are, that unfortunately missed out on that interim one-time funding. So they're kind of on a wait list or limbo. So I'm one of the fortunate ones. It was just the right timing, but I'm just looking for more options as well.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. So I'm glad to hear that you were able to access that funding. So we are all quite excited waiting for the launch of the new OAP and the core services. And so that the level of need for your child would be identified through that independent intake organization. They would be doing a brief assessment, if you will, of your child with a screening tool, I would anticipate, to determine the level of need for your child, and then allocating an amount of money based on need. And with greater need, there would be more funding. So you could buy a broader array of services if your child had more needs, and you'd have access to lower amounts of money if your child had less need. So that they'll be doing that determination. We don't have a launch date for, we have not heard a launch date for those broader services yet. They were getting some kids going this summer. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if COVID has unfortunately had an impact on some of these things. It has made a lot of things seem slower than any of us would want. So I'm not sure if I actually answered your question though.
No, I do understand. I think what I wanted to know was, like, for example, my one-time funding does end in March. So I'm just thinking like what my next steps would be, because I don't know if I'll be able to apply again for the one-time funding, or do I now have to wait to either get an invitation letter from the ministry into this special program.
Yeah, the new program. Yeah, so that they have not released information about what happens March 31st. At this point, we don't have any new information about what the next steps are. They previously, from past experience, when things have stopped, when there's been money, we have seen kids have an opportunity to apply again. So there was the initial amount of money, and then there was a second one. It's October now, so I anticipate it'll be a while yet before we hear what happens after the end of the end of March. And the government works on something called a fiscal year that goes, April 1st to March 31st. So from their perspective, I would expect that they see this as a bit early days to be telling us what will happen. What I'm really hopeful for is that, in fact, the needs-based program is coming online, because that will be really addressing more of what children need than this interim funding. This was sort of an effort to get some money into parents' hands so they could purchase some services. But they acknowledge it's not a needs-based system at this time.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you for your question.
If anybody else has some very direct personal questions about their situation, then by all means. I will find that out for you in 1 second, and I will post it. Or if you want to give me, your contact information, I can send you an email. I'm just going to ask our tech support right now. Let's see. Where's Caregiver? Sarah, are you here?
Yes, I'm still here. Yes.
Oh no, sorry. I meant our tech support.
Sorry.
That's okay, Caregiver. I will send you that in a second once I talk to our tech support. I suspect it'll be connected to the website for this conference, but just let me confirm that for you. So if we don't get it resolved by the end of this session, I'll send you an email with the information, okay?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. I'm wondering, Nancy? Oh,
I think we're good.
okay.
Oh,
Hold on, let me copy down Jill's number 2 before we do this.
Can I ask a quick question if there's time?
Of course.
please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Freeman. I'm wondering for families who receive a diagnosis after that, I think it was the March 2021 deadline, would they be added to the wait list for funding when that's available, or how would that work for them?
I want to be cautious how I answer this because I don't actually have the information. So I don't want to be appearing to give a promise that isn't one that I'm in a position to fulfill. But what I would expect is if your child's received a diagnosis, I would contact the ministry at the earliest opportunity, and I can put the contact information back up if you didn't get that. But to get your child registered, because all children should be continuing to go on the wait list. The interim funding, they had that deadline of March 31st, but the intention is that children are getting the services that they need. So I would register right away for a couple of reasons. One is to get in queue to get funding to purchase services, but also there are services that you can be getting right now. So the foundational family services. So, someone mentioned they took Triple P, which is a really great intervention through us through foundational. It's free, no charge to families, lots of workshops, lots of, a workshop and then coaching with your child. So there's lots of things that you can be getting actually right now. So I would encourage you to get on that list as soon as possible. And I would expect that you get on the list and then you would be on the waiting list for services through this provincial intake organization.
Perfect. Thanks so much. I'm actually a school psychologist. I want to make sure if I'm giving a diagnosis that I'm giving families the most accurate information. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so happy for you to have the information from the slide deck, and everything that I have said is on the ministry website. Literally, if you throw Ontario Autism Program into a Google search, it all pops up, and any of these things are available. Now, I have found there have been times where, there's been a lot of changes to the program over the past couple of years, and as changes come online, they often will just put the information up right away on the government website. So it's always worth checking back.
Perfect. I'll keep doing that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks,
and I'll share it with my colleagues.
That's great. Thank you.
And Jill and Cavery, I just got a message from our tech support, and she said that it would be up to the TV. It is the TDSB that will be arranging where this recording goes. And she suspects it will be on a YouTube channel. Again, I will find out for sure, and I will send the 2 emails that I have the update about this. Okay, good. You're very welcome. All right. Lorna, Lisa, are there any questions that you had about? Okay. Lisa, if there is any if there's something that you can think of afterwards, by all means, send it to, I think you have a contact number with for parents, for the conference leader. So you can send it to them and they'll direct it to Nancy or myself. Okay.
I'm just going to go back up also if people are wanting contact information for referring kids into Surrey Place. That's our number. And go back up in the central intake. Try to remember where that slide was. Here we go. And that's the provincial. That's the provincial for registering for the Ontario Autism Program across the province.
Right. So one of our participants had asked for the slides. That was the psychologist. That's fine with you. I can just send them out.
Oh, please, yeah.
Okay, good. So I'll send them out to both, and then once I find out the YouTube connection, I'll let Cavery know. She wanted to know about the YouTube piece.
Sure.
All right. And I think that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Aaron, for moderating, and thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate you taking time on a Saturday to come out to hear about the autism program.
Very well. Good. All right.
Great.
And Nancy, we will see you soon.
See you. Take care, Aaron. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.